Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Tuesday, June 7th, and this is one of two podcasts we're going to have today. So just giving you all a heads up on that. We're probably going to have one around 5 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock, so we'll let you all know when that's going to be. Have a better time here in a little bit, but that's all I'm going to say about that, Vince. Today's show is going to be focused on the Notre Dame football team. And
yes.
It's kind of interesting. Like, this is an interesting offseason for Notre Dame in that there are aspects where I'm like reading the preseason magazines and I'm like, okay, this guy's not getting enough love. And then you're like, oh wow, like they're giving mad respect to that group, right? Like, so I'm looking at like the Lindy's preseason magazine and I'm just kind of like irate that there's like no Jason Admiral in there, right? And then I look over and I'm like, okay, Cam Hart's getting respect, number 10 corner coming back. There's other guys getting respect, and then you see that the offensive line is ranked as the number one offensive line heading in the season. The secondary is ranked fourth. So it's like, well, they're getting some respect in some other areas. And then you read other publications and like top 25 D tackles in the country, Jason Admiral or Tyler Buckner can't play or whatever the case. So we've just been kind of going back and forth on this kind of stuff. And I thought it'd be fun to do a show where we kind of break down the three players that we think are the most disrespected on the Notre Dame football team, and then the three that are the most underrated. Now, there's a difference between the two to me. Underrated is just sort of like, hey, this guy's a nice player and he did some nice things, but he's just not viewed properly. And then there's just like the disrespect is like, this guy stinks. He needs to not play, or he's going to get benched this time or that other time. Or it can also be, people are just like talking down a kid that you think should be much higher, or they're not looking at a kid. So it takes in national, it takes in fans, it takes in the whole everything. And so we kind of left it broad and open. And so we're going to get started with the disrespect, Vince. And there is a very heavy flavor in one direction on your disrespected list, which I found interesting. And I'll have some thoughts on it, big picture, after you're done.
Okay.
But I'm going to let you kick it off with your number. So we're just going to go 1, 1, 1, 1,
okay.
1, right? And just talk about it. And we'll just kind of, we'll share our own thoughts on those players and just kind of, rock through it so we can kind of get a nice rhythm. And, you and I tend to, stick on one and we got to rush through the last three because we focus on. So we're just going to kind of go through it that way. But I'm going to let you start it off, Vince. So when we talk about the disrespected category, you kick things off with who is your most disrespected player returning for Notre Dame in 2022?
Yeah, so I think that it's going to be I don't think this is the category that you were insinuating when you were talking about my group, whereas where I'm going to start. I'm going to start on the offensive line because I think that
I'll go ahead and start off with mine, Vince.
Thank you.
My number one is, and I might be putting him in the wrong list, but I have just kind of looked at how Jason Admiral is viewed, and it's just kind of mind-boggling for me. And Ryan and I have been talking a lot about this here the last couple weeks, from a draft perspective, and then kind of looking at like preseason All-Americans and expectations. And Lindy's actually gave Jason some love, right? Like, so that was the first time I'd seen anybody kind of give Jason some respect to, like, they talked about how him and Isaiah Foskey are key factors in why Notre Dame has the number 4 defensive line in the country heading into the 2022 season. And so, you kind of, you look at that and you say, okay, that's one, but that's like it. And I feel like when I look at Jason Admiral, it's even beyond, to me, like, not being he's underrated. I think it borders on just disrespect and just not so much fans, but to a degree fans. But when you just look at draft boards and, I've heard some stuff about, maybe like bottom of the draft, 6th, 7th round or undrafted. And then you read some of the analysis and you're like, I'm not sure what you're seeing, or you're taking his couple negatives and like turning them into these huge, big deals that they're not. And I'm like, this is, to me, one of the most disruptive returning interior players in the country. And to me, it gets back to the notion, Vince, of he's got to produce more. I get all that. But if you can't watch the film and see that this kid is super productive and some of the sacks other players are getting are because of his pressures, then I just don't know what to tell you. But when I watch Jason Admiral events, I see a kid that is super, super, I mean, underrated, but also to me, just flat disrespected for not being the impact player that he is. So that's kind of where I come from with my number one guy. Are you ready to give your number one? Are you in a
Yeah.
position to give? Okay.
No, I'm definitely ready. So again, you kind of brought up a category of guys that I think is probably my 2 and 3, because my number one guy is in a category all by himself. And I'm going to the offensive line. And I think that this young man is disrespected because I think he was playing out of position, to be perfectly honest with you. It's Josh Lugg is who I'm talking about. And we had talked a long time ago, for that matter, about how he's better as a guard. And I think that he's not as good in space as that you would want him to be a high level tackle. Can he play tackle for some other teams? I think so. Yeah. But at Notre Dame, I think his best spot is at guard. And I think he gets disrespected based on what people were able to see from him at tackle as a full-time starter. And I think that he is going to show a lot of people this year that, hey, my position is inside. My position is guard. Even though he's 6'8" or 6'9", whatever he is, he's a massive human
6'7",
being.
yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily think that he's a guard material because he's that tall, which is why he doesn't work at center, to be honest with you. But I think guard is his natural position, and I think he's going to surprise a lot of people this year. I really do, and it's going to be really, really good for Josh Lugg at guard this year, getting every start. At least we think that he's going to be the starter at right guard, but getting every start, being next to Fisher, and who knows who's going to be at center at this point. But I just feel like his position is guard. He's going to be able to show some people, hey, I belong as a starting 5 at Notre Dame, and it's going to be good for Notre Dame, and it's going to be good for Josh Lugg.
Yeah, I think last year his play got way too much criticism. I thought there were times when he would get beat, but I thought overall Josh Lugg was a quality football player last year. And I don't want to use Pro Football Focus rankings to make a point, because I think a lot of times their rankings stink, but they had him as Notre Dame's highest graded offensive lineman last year. So, yeah, I think I like the having Luggs back on that one. That's a good one. Here's my number 2.
Okay.
Braden Lindsey. I think Braden Lindsey has just gotten to the point where he's just flat disrespected at this point in time, and not even like underrated, because I don't think you can call him underrated because he hasn't done enough to prove that he deserves more play. Right. Sure. So this isn't a situation where, hey, Braden's been good and you guys aren't giving him enough respect and that kind of stuff. I just think it's kind of gotten to the point where it's just disrespectful to the manner in which it's like he's viewed and talked about as like he's a soft kid and he's, he doesn't love football and there's all these kind of things that maybe at times there's been a kernel of truth to them or not, whatever, but it just has kind of turned into this thing where people are just writing him off. Like, right. Some people have a very healthy view of Braden Lindsey, which is, I think this kid could be a really impact player if this happens, but he's got to show me he can do this, and this. And that's a totally fine, fair thing to say. But it's to the point now where it's kind of like with Braden Lindsey where, and it's going to be this way for some of my other players, and it's why I almost had Chris Tyree in my disrespected list. Originally did, but I had to move him over to make room for my number 3 guy. But it was just kind of like where people are just like, I just can't wait for Braden Lindsey to get beat out. Like, what? Like that's your thought on Braden Lindsey? Like one of your most explosive guys on your team? Like you just want to get beat out?
He's forgotten.
I don't even think he's forgotten about. I think there's like vitriol towards him with people. Like there's a dislike for him with some people, which I don't understand. And I've gotten a chance to know Braden a little bit over the years. He's a very nice kid. I really enjoy him, and he did some solid things last year for them. He was a very dynamic and impactful player in 2019. For Notre Dame, and showed that he can be that guy. And yes, he's been injured, and those things are frustrating. But it's kind of at the point now where it's like people just assume something negative about Braden Lindsey, and actively root for him to not kind of have a role. And that kind of like, wow, okay, that's a little strange. Instead of sort of some of the healthy things we could say about him, like, he's got to prove that he cannot go through a full season and all that, So how he is viewed with some of the Notre Dame fan base really kind of like makes me scratch my head a little bit with how he is viewed and how he's talked about amongst the fan base. I mean, I think the kid's got a chance to be an impact player. He's got a lot to prove, but I mean, I think we should all be hoping that he does break out because he can do things that really not a lot of other guys on the roster can do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good one. And he was on my short list. There's no question. I have a couple guys on my short list. We can give like an honorable mention a little bit later if they don't get mentioned by either one of us. But yeah, he was definitely on my short list. That's for sure. My second guy, and I'm moving to the other side of the football now, and both of these guys are going to come from the same room. But my first one's JD Bertrand. And look, JD Bertrand had one of the quietest years at middle linebacker.
100 plus tackles.
He led the team in tackles, had 101 tackles on the season. I mean, his numbers were really, really good. Now, does he have things that he needs to work on? Yeah, of course, no question. But I think he, with the linebacking class that came in this year, you got Junior Tuihalamaka doing his thing. And I think people have just absolutely forgotten about JD Bertrand and what he brings to the table at middle linebacker. I mean, he holds the team together on defense. He's the middle linebacker. He's the captain of the defense, etc. I just think he gets overlooked an awful lot. It was a lot of production from a guy that a lot of people aren't talking about, right? And I think this is a prime example of who's the next big thing at Mike linebacker, but you've got a returning starter. Like, I just think that he's
sort
of
right, sort of.
You know what I mean?
He was, sort of. He was a will last year.
Well,
and I think that adds, but I think that adds to your point, though, Vince, is he had the production he had while playing out of position.
Right.
I would argue he was playing out of position. I think that, will is not the natural position for him, and you talk about his production. I mean, in the last, I'm going all the way back to 2015, 2014, 2013, 2012. So if you go all the way back to 2010, there have been 3 players that had more solo tackles than what JD Bertrand had last year. That and he had 63 solo tackles. Here's the list. Manti Te'o, who only did it once in 3 years since 2010. And that was in 2010. He had 64, one more than JD Bertrand. Here's the other guy on the list. Cat named Jalen Smith, who had 64 and 69 in 14 and 15. He was pretty decent, right?
A little bit.
And then the other one, I'm sorry, I correct myself. There's only 2 that had more than him. Another guy tied him. That was Tavon Coney in 2018 in 13 games. So when you look at JD Bertrand and 2 of those 3 guys were Mike's.
Right.
He did that as a will.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so I feel like JD, to your point, I was thinking about him when you put him on your list. It made it easier for me to not put him on mine because I knew we'd get to talk about him. But I don't think there's enough. I think that sometimes with him, people didn't think he was any good, so then they grab on to the holes in his game, length, missed tackles, and allow those to completely overshadow all the good he's done as a football player.
And those are things he needs to work on
in his first year as a starter.
Right, exactly.
In his first year as a starter.
And he wasn't anticipating being a starter. I mean, maybe he was, but like as a
Maris
whole,
was going to start at will if he doesn't get hurt. 100%.
Exactly. And JD had a good fall. I mean, we were all talking about him. I mean, he was making plays, he was doing all these things, but it's like, well, Maris is still a starter, until he got hurt. And you're like, okay, JD can do a decent job of filling in. He'll be okay. He'll be solid, right? Well, I think he went above and beyond solid, in my opinion. And I think that a lot of people aren't talking about him, especially since Maris is coming back, right? Because now all the focus is on what can Maris be, et cetera, et cetera. So I just think he gets a little bit of disrespect when it comes to all that with the season that he had and the potential that he has moving forward in helping out this linebacking core.
So, Vince, I would like for you to then give your number 3 because they kind of go hand in hand. And I think it would make sense to transition from that one to your next one.
Absolutely. So my third one is, like I said, I'm staying in the same room. I'm going with Jack Kaiser on this one. And look, no one on the defense had bigger shoes to fill than Jack Kaiser. Okay.
You think?
I don't think there's any better way to put it, right? No one has
replacing a Butkus Award winner considered a difficult thing to do. Okay.
Slightly difficult, right? And look, he had his share of missed opportunities as well. I mean, we could harp on that if we wanted to, but I think that also overshadows the good that he did. I almost feel like it's a very similar conversation for JD as it is for Jack, to be honest with you, because he made the routine plays. He made a lot of plays, and he played the position differently than his predecessor, Okay.
Mhm.
He did. And it's the same position, but he played it differently. And they used him a bit differently as well. I think that also needs to be understood. But he held his own, man. I mean, he was top 7 in tackles in space and all those different things. I would have loved to see a few more tackles for loss, of course. But again, he's not the same player as Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He never will be. And for us to expect him to be is not okay. You know what I mean? That's just not okay. But I think he did a really, really good job at his spot, and he held it down. And I think he's very much disrespected. I'm going to guess that you never saw his name in any of the preseason magazines that you've been reading. So
no, well, and understandably so, right?
I get it.
But I think to your point though, and this is why I wanted you to kind of go on these guys back to back is, the secondary was ranked 4th by Lindy's in the top 10 position groups. Linebacker wasn't in the top 10.
Right.
And so I think I understand why, but I think it's a kind of a sign of disrespect a little bit because there are some groups in there that like they lost some guys too, right? And it's like you're assuming those guys are going to step up and play well, and yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out for sure.
So who's your number 3, Brian?
Tyler Buckner. And the great thing is there's someone in the chat showing exactly what I'm talking about. Tyler Buckner went from like Messiah, gonna fix all of our problems. He should start over Jack Cone, which, we weren't saying that.
No.
To doing exactly what we said he should do last year, to now people talking about, well, he can't play, can't throw. Yeah, I know he threw for 4,500 yards as a junior and 58 touchdowns, and he wasn't asked to throw last year, but, he can't throw now all of a sudden.
He can't throw at all. It's all
to the point where it's like there's people assuming like, okay, Dante Moore is going to come to Notre Dame and beat Tyler Buckner out as I mean, we've heard that plenty of times, right? And we've, how many times has that popped up in our chat?
But we're already hearing about Dante Moore being an afterthought now too. After the 24 hours, so
it's just kind of how it is, right? And it's like, well, he wasn't that good anyway. It's
right,
like,
yeah.
Some of the disrespect that Tyler Buckner gets, and then nationally, there's just this thought of, well, this is the if you read people that talk about Notre Dame, one of the biggest things that they say for their concerns about Notre Dame, it's always quarterback.
Sure.
And then you look at kind of like how some of the other top quarterbacks were viewed last year. There was an assumption that C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young and a lot of these other sophomores were going to jump up in the sophomore seasons, but Tyler Buckner doesn't get that bit of the doubt. Right. And then, somebody's like, well, look what happened against Virginia Tech, and he's not a winner. And I'm like, okay, let's not forget they were losing 10-0 when he came into the game. Can we like pretend, like not pretend that was the case?
Right.
And, it's gotten to the point where I look at it and I'm like, some of y'all just have no idea what's about to happen this year. I mean, again, look, does he got us to prove he can stay healthy? Sure. Absolutely. That's a totally, if that's your concern, totally fine with that. Does he got to improve his game and all that? Sure. But if you're looking at how he played in 2021 and you're using that as your reason he can't play in 2022, it's like, then you don't understand what he was put in the game for. Right. I mean, that's kind of been my big thing. So I just, I look at him and I just feel like this kid's getting disrespected from outside sources and even more so from Notre Dame fans, which is kind of surprising when you consider the exact opposite was happening a year ago. So it's kind of like we at times have a lack of ability to self-reflect on our own opinions.
Right. Sure.
And so we set a standard for someone, they don't live up to it. Instead of looking at it like maybe I shouldn't have assumed he was going to win the Heisman last year. I say sarcastically, hyperbolic to make a point, right? Instead of looking at it and saying, you know what, maybe my expectations were wrong. It's no, he can't play now. And it's kind of like, well, no, we tried to tell y'all what his role was going to be last year. It was exactly that. He was a dynamic player. He averaged over 7 yards a carry, and they took away half of what he can do because that's not what they needed him to do last year.
Exactly.
So
it's not what he was prepared to do either. Like that.
Right.
I think people need to understand that too. It's not like they were giving him straight up number 2 reps behind Jack Cohn
Right.
last year and asking
Right.
him to do what Jack
Pine
Cohn
was
was
getting a
doing.
lot of those. Right.
Exactly my
Pine
point.
was getting a lot of
Yes.
those.
Exactly my
Because what he wasn't getting was the 40% reps that a number 2 quarterback normally gets. That's what he was not getting last year. And then he gets thrust into the Virginia Tech game. And then it's funny, the people that are disrespecting him only focus on some of the struggles in the second half, and they forget about how good he looked early. 5 of 8, 104 yards, a touch, leads them on 2 touchdown drives, and they end up going from down 10-0 to 14 to 10 lead at halftime. And then, of course, Virginia Tech was able to take advantage of the fact that he didn't get those reps to run the entire offense and see those kind of things. So that's just some of those things where you look at it and you say, he's not only not getting he's not underrated, because I don't think you can be underrated when you haven't played a lot.
Yeah.
Right. The issue is, I think it's more of it's disrespectful. That's my thing.
So we have another category that we need to discuss today, Brian. And that category is underrated as opposed to disrespectful. So this is a different kind of way to look at things. And I think, there's going to be a little bit of crossover, I think, between our lists here, but I think that that's understood because you can look at it from 2 different perspectives. And I really like your disrespected list. Do you want me to lead off, or do you want to lead off?
Yeah, let's kick it off, because our number 1 most underrated player, our number 1 guy, is the same guy.
Okay, cool. Then that's easy.
Right.
That's easy. I'm assuming it's the fan club that I'm a part of.
Yeah, not part of.
Founder.
You're
and
president.
member.
You're the founder, president, and main promoter of that fan club, of which I am I'm a member of the fan club.
We have jackets.
You are the founder and president and CEO of that fan club. So yes,
that's right.
We're talking about Cam Hart. So
we're talking about Cam Hart. That's exactly right. Yeah. So Cam Hart is definitely on my underrated list. And the fact that you told me that Lindy's has Notre Dame secondary as in the top 10 for all of college football did surprise me a little bit, because I think that overall the secondary is underrated, with the exception of Joseph at safety. I think he is very highly rated by a lot of people, and I think that he is going to get a lot of respect from people coming from Northwestern to Notre Dame, since he was an All-American, et cetera, et cetera. So I think he is actually getting a lot of respect. I do not think that Cam Hart is getting the respect that he deserves, or the rating that he deserves, because he's still going to be the number 1 corner in Notre Dame secondary on apparently a top 10 secondary. So that tells me that he's pretty darn good. And I want to be careful with the verbiage that I use. I don't want to say he's going to lock down every guy that he covers and, all of those different things. But there's a reason that he didn't get a lot of opportunities last year, because teams realized how good Cam Hart was, and they were going another direction. So I think opposing offenses held Cam Hart in high regard, okay? But I don't think he's getting the national attention that he deserves at this point in his career. And I think this year is going to go a long way to getting him that status that I think that he deserves going into the year. But I think he's going to prove a lot of people, I wouldn't say wrong, but he's going to end up on some lists, and he's going to open some eyes and things of that nature moving forward. So I just think that he's not getting the love that he deserves in the preseason.
I thought that I was happy to see Lindy's put him as the number 10 corner in the country coming back. I mean, I think you can make a case for him a couple spots higher, but I think he showed at least enough first year things that I'm fine at 10. The issue is that there's a lot of people not even putting him anywhere close to the top 10 or 15. Right. I mean, I think like was it Mel Kiper? Was it his big board? I thought Mel Kiper's 2023 big board. I don't think he even had. I'm going to actually look it up, because now that I'm trying to think about it, but I don't even think he had Cam Hart on his top cornerback list. Maybe it was him, but I see a lot of these different lists for like the draft and like coming into the season, and you see all these top 10s and top 15s and top 20s, and you just don't see Cam Hart mentioned. Yeah, he didn't have Cam Hart anywhere on there for his top 10 kind of heading into the draft. And he's got the kid from Stanford, Caillou Blue Kelly, who's a nice player, ranked number 5. Got Joey Porter Jr. in there, and it's like, okay, you need to have Cam Hart in there. So I think he's definitely underrated. I don't think he's disrespectful, because I think people will give him, say, he had a good first year and all that. He's just got a lot to prove, which I think is fair. But I think even his start, I think the thing for me is his starting point should still be higher.
Right.
I think Cam can prove to be a top 5 to 6 corner this year. He's got to prove that. There's room for improvement needed to get there.
And I have no problem with that.
Right.
With what you're talking about, I have no problem with it, but he should at least be in the discussion going into the season.
And some people don't have him in that conversation, and that's the thing where I think he's underrated. I mean, we're even seeing that from some Notre Dame fans. I mean, we saw this the other day where somebody's like, oh, he's got to prove a lot more. And I'm like, but statistically, he gave up fewer yards last year than Troy Pride gave up, or than Julian Love gave up in each of his last 2 years when he was an All-American football player. And yet because I think sometimes we have a tendency to form an opinion, and it takes an insane amount of information to change that opinion, as opposed to just, hey, here's my opinion, but I'm gonna let the data prove me wrong. I thought Kyron Williams was one of the lowest ranked kids in that 2019 class, right? But you know what? He pretty quickly proved me wrong, right? And you have to be willing to admit that, and you did admit that. So to the point where I was surprised he fell in the draft as far as he did. So I think some of us need to not hold on to those assumptions we made, or opinions that we had. As hard as we do, we need to allow the data and the evidence to prove us wrong. And for the people that are still saying cornerback is, Cam Hart's not a proven player for Notre Dame, it's like, I don't know what you're watching at that point. I had one person saying, he's like, well, he never shows up in games. Like, what do you mean? He's like, you hardly ever hear him talked about in games. I was like, you do know that's a positive, right? You do know that you just kind of proved your point wrong. Because if you're only watching on TV and you never hear his name called, that means they're not completing passes on him, right? Like, you're not making the point you think you're making. But, it is what it is. So, but so Cam Hart's my number 1. Who's your number 2 disrespected? Because I think you kind of had
cheated,
lumped 2 into 1.
Not totally cheated. Yeah, there's no
I'll allow it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I had a sidebar with you earlier, so we're good. But so my number 2 are 2 guys, and they both happen to be the exact same age, and that would be the
look-alike brothers. No, they're like 3 minutes apart in age.
Okay,
I think
that's actually closer than my twins are. So there you go. Okay. So you eloquently talked about Jason Admiral already, so I won't necessarily rehash that, but I think he is underrated. And I could see the disrespected side of it as well.
For the same reasons, right.
Exactly. Yes. So there's no point in rehashing that, but I will talk about Justin Admiral. And I think that he is underrated not only by the national people, but also by fans to a degree as well. Because, look, he's not even slated to start this year, I'm guessing, right? The way things are shaking out. And he was second on the team in sacks last year. So,
5. I mean, he had, a decent year.
People forget that Justin Admiral had a really good season and that he's a really good football player. And I think people also forget when the recruiting started, if you want to go all the way back to that, he was more highly recruited than his brother was. Now, granted, that shifted, but he was more highly recruited than his brother. So I think Justin Admiral almost feels like an afterthought, because I will piggyback off of your point when you talk about when guys came in and how they were rated and things like that. There was a lot of people out there that thought that he was an add-on to Jason. Basically, hey, we're going to offer his brother to make sure that Jason comes, like that kind of a thing. I think that was a very widely held thought process with a lot of fans. And that is so not the case. He has 100% earned his scholarship. And I would feel just fine with Justin Admiral starting on the defensive line. Now, luckily, the defensive line is one that you're pretty much going to need 8 guys in order to be effective. So he's almost like a pseudo starter, and his numbers are going to be really good. I think his numbers are going to be better than they were last year, frankly. I think he's going to get forgot about. I think he's going to get a lot of one-on-one opportunities, and I think he's going to do some really, really good things this year. And I don't think anybody's going to see it coming outside of our wonderful people that listen to us on a regular basis. I really,
because I feel like he's someone who in these chats gets a lot of respect.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
But when I talk to other circles, he's definitely someone that I think gets underrated. My number 2 is, and I had a hard time on where to put him, and I think a case could be made that I should have flipped Jason and Chris Tyree and put Jason Admiral in the underrated category, because I don't think Notre Dame fans, for the most part, underrate Jason Admiral. Most of the disrespect for him, to me, comes from the outside. And so I think that you could have made a case that Chris Tyree deserves to be in the disrespected category. But for me, I'm going to put him in the underrated category because I don't think, especially fans, like I understand some from a national standpoint why he's not, not rated where he should, because he doesn't have a ton of production. But I think that there's a lot of people that have picked this game apart to the point where they don't understand kind of what they're watching from the standpoint of like, well, they watch Kyron Williams and then they watch Chris Tyree and they're like, well, Chris isn't doing what Kyron's doing, so he's not good. It's like, well, they're different players,
right?
And he's doing, and it's like, I had somebody the other day say, when's he ever had he's never had any big games or big moments, and I'm like, you do know he had 100 yards receiving in the most recent game that he played in, right?
Yeah,
like, you get that, right?
Right.
And but no, they don't, and I think he's very underrated. Now, look, part of that is his own issue. And not that he's done anything wrong. You can't control an injury, but I think part of it is because he did miss the spring. I think if Chris Tyree would have played in the spring, we would have a different view of him. And I think that could be the counter argument to people who say I shouldn't consider him underrated, that he's perfectly evaluated perfectly because of a lack of production and the injury stuff. So I think that'd be a very fair thing. And that's why I took him off the disrespected thing, because I do sort of understand why there are some people saying, I'm not sure if I'm ready to jump on the Chris Tyree bandwagon, but I do. That's why I left him in the underrated. So
yeah,
I think that's a better place for him. I think that his impact has not been given enough respect. Even last year with all the injuries, he had a 50-something yard reception against Toledo in a game that if you take that play away, I don't know if Notre Dame wins that game.
Sure.
Right. I mean, so what was it, like 17-16 at the time, I think is when that play was.
That sounds right.
And so, that turned out to be a pretty big play. And then you look at obviously what he was able to do against Oklahoma State, a team that allowed one 100-yard receiver all season. And then he goes out and does what he does. So I was a little surprised that I'm actually looking at that play now, trying to find that play. Chris Tyree highlights against Toledo, but I just kind of feel, Vince, like I said, I don't think he gets enough credit for what he has done. We can say, hey, look, he needs to do more. He needs to stay healthy. He's got to do this. He's got to do that. And I think all those things are fair. I think it's more about, I just feel like he doesn't get enough credit for what he has done at Notre Dame. And I think that's kind of why he falls into the underrated category for me. Yes, a lot to prove. Don't disagree with that.
He does.
But
and I think people underestimate his impact on special teams as well. You know what I mean?
Right. That Wisconsin play was huge.
It was the turning point in that game. I mean, it really was. They were losing at that time when he took that kickback. I mean, that was the turning point. That swung the momentum from one side to the other, and then the defense pretty much took it over from there. But at the same time, people forget that that's part of his game as well, right? And I guess I'm projecting or predicting a little bit, but I don't think he's going to be getting the number of carries that is going to prevent him from still being a kick return guy, right? And so I think his impact on the football game is still going to be twofold, threefold if you count rushing, receiving, and returning, right? So I think his all-purpose yards are going to be massive, and it's going to be huge for this team as long as he can stay healthy. And that's a question mark. There's no question about that. I mean, I think that's something that we have to take into consideration. But again, that's not necessarily his fault. But if he can stay healthy, I think he goes way out of the underrated category very quickly.
Right. I think for me, when you look at Chris Tyree, even for all the issues that he had last year with health and all that kind of stuff, the fact is Chris Tyree made two huge fourth quarter plays that helped Notre Dame win football games. The Toledo game, they were winning 17-14. That made it a 24-16 game. Toledo went right down the field and scored the next drive. If Chris Tyree doesn't make the play that he made, who knows the way the Notre Dame's offense was playing, who knows if they score there, so they were at, not even in midfield yet. It was a first down. Maybe they go down and score. Maybe they just get a field goal and then now they're down. So there's a lot, and then of course the Wisconsin kick return. I mean, we forget that Notre Dame had just fumbled the ball. Drew Pine had just been sacked, fumbled. Wisconsin had gotten the ball, taken the lead to go up 13-10, and Chris Tyree, takes it back, and the very next kick takes it back 90 plus yards, and Notre Dame's got the lead again in the fourth quarter. So, say what you want about him, but he had 2 game-changing plays last year for Notre Dame in key moments, and that was as a backup. Now he's going to get a chance to play more. And he's got to prove that he can be healthy and do that. But I think he doesn't get enough respect for what he's doing, but I don't think he's disrespected because I understand kind of why.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm coming from. So who's your number 3 guy on the list?
I'm at 3+. We'll call it 3+. But my 3+ is a guy that we already talked about as well. It's Tyler Buckner. I think he is severely underrated, and I'm looking at the chat right now, and I'm seeing that one person in particular is definitely underrating Tyler Buckner.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting ready to put somebody in timeout. Go ahead.
But no, look, Tyler Buckner is the clear starter on this football team. He is, and look, this season is going to be made or broken by the play of the quarterback. I think that you could say that about a lot of teams, right? But I think that we are all in agreement, you and I, and not the one guy, about the fact that Tyler Buckner is the clear quarterback for this team. And now, I will also say that if Drew Pine's number is called, I have faith that he can run the offense. Okay, I will always say that, and I know you've said that as well. But Tyler Buckner brings something different to this offense that they haven't had in a while, and I think that he's going to be dynamic. And I think that a lot of people are. I don't know whether it's they're looking at Dante Moore. I don't know whether they just don't have any faith based on a couple, the interceptions that he threw last year, and we've talked about that a million times. I don't know where the non-confidence is coming for Tyler Buckner, and the fact that I didn't get to see him in the spring game, I think hurts that perception. I really do. And the manner in which he was injured, walking down the stairs, I get it. You can say a million different things about that particular injury. I get that. But he's still, I saw him, walking and running around a little bit the other day over at the practice facility. The dude's fine. He's going to be just fine. And he's going to be fine all summer. He's going to be fine going into fall, and he's going to prove that he is the guy that is going to lead this offense. And I was actually talking to somebody earlier today, and they were asking me, do I think the offense is going to take a step back this year? I think they're going to take a step forward this year. I think they're going to be more dynamic. I think they're going to have more playmakers this year. And I think Tyler Buckner is the guy to get the ball in their hands, and he's also going to be a playmaker himself. So nationally, I think he's underrated. I think with an aspect of the fan base, I think he's underrated. But I think he is going to prove a lot of people wrong moving forward this season.
So first of all, we are going to do a Q&A afterwards if we have questions. I haven't seen any really so far, but if you guys do want to ask questions, you can go ahead and start throwing those in now, and we'll get into those. It can be related to this topic or other topics, but just kind of throwing out there, start putting those in there, because if we don't have any, we'll take off. No worries. We won't have to do a long show today
because there's another one coming, right? I mean,
there's going to be another one coming, right? Not sure of what the time is. That's why you need to be subscribed and hit the notification bell, right? So that's why you need to be subscribed and hit the notification so that you are made aware that we are having a show. So we'll do one either around 4:30, 5 o'clock. Manages being me today, so we'll have to see about that, but we'll find out. So, Vince, I had a tough time with my third one.
Okay.
And I felt like I wanted to go with like Blake Fisher for a while, because I feel like he's being underrated because Joe Walt played so well. Blake didn't play a ton, and there's all this hype about Joe Walt and all those type of things. I feel like Blake Fisher. But then I'm like, but he's played a game and a half of football. I understand why he's being underrated. Like, I do think he's being underrated, but I didn't have him on my top 3 because I understand he's played a game and a half of football.
Right.
Yeah, I thought about doing Josh Lugg, but I was like, but I understand some of the reasons that Josh Lugg is being underrated. Excuse me. The injuries, and he's been out of position at times, and I don't agree with it, but I can understand. And Josh has some stuff to prove as well. I thought about Maris Luafau, but then I was like, but he didn't play last year, and there's all these type of. I went a lot of different angles, but I just kept coming back to one guy, and that is Avery Davis. And I feel like him not playing in the spring, I think like there's some people that kind of forget he's a part of the team. I've heard people kind of talk about the receiver position next year, and they don't even mention like that he's a part of it. So he still is on the team, and he still is a guy that's going to be counted on, assuming he's healthy, right? This is the big key. But Avery has been a really money player for Notre Dame the last couple of years, and I don't think people get enough. They don't. And partly me, I say people, I'm also talking about myself at times, but Avery has had some really clutch plays that we don't pay enough attention to. I mean, even the third down touchdown against Duke 2 years ago in the opener, right? I mean, he just was such a good third down player in 2020. And then you think about the Clemson game, and we all remember the long pass that he caught that got them into scoring range, but then we forget he worked himself open to get the touchdown pass from me and Book a couple plays later that tied the game up. And so, he had another really good sideline catch that game that was important. Like, Avery's been a very integral part of this offense, and I kind of feel like you're underrating him, because I don't know if we have to be able to look at receivers differently. Like, him not being Will Fuller or doesn't mean he's not good.
Yeah. Right.
Some guys have very important roles. I mean, Hunter Renfro, if you look at his college stats, Hunter Renfro never had any big, like, oh wow, look at that 1,000-yard season, right? That kind of thing. I mean, I'm looking at Hunter Renfro's numbers now. His 4 years, he had 33 catches for 492, 44 catches for 495, 60 catches for 602, 49 catches for 544 yards. He only had 15 touchdowns his entire career. But
they were
I can remember like 5 of them, like off the top of my head. You know what I mean? Like, because they were really important plays. He was a really clutch player, even though the volume wasn't there of the Mike Williams and Artavis Scott and T. Higgins and Justin Ross. He was a really productive player. Avery hasn't gotten to that level. He was at 24 catches for 322 yards in 2020. He was at 27 catches for 386 yards last year. But he's only been playing receiver for 2 years. I mean, he's got 8 touchdowns in 3 years, 6 in the last 2. And so, yeah, I'd like to see him get the ball more. I think part of that's been a byproduct of some of the other issues that the program has had. And I think a guy like Avery needs a quarterback that can be a really quick decision maker. And there's some other things that I think were lacking last year that kind of tamped his production down a little bit. Plus, last year, his 27 catches for 386 yards came in 8 games.
I felt like he was, when he got hurt, that was a huge blow to this team.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no doubt about it. I mean, he's an integral part in what they wanted to do offensively. And I think not necessarily last year, but the year before, he was massively underutilized.
Right.
I love Avery Davis, and I love what he brings to the table, not on the field and off the field for that matter. Yeah. But he's fast. He runs good routes. I think he's really coming into his own as a receiver. Yeah.
Well,
seriously.
Talk about coming into your own, Vince, last year. I mean, if you project his numbers in 8 games over 12, over 13, it's 44 catches for 627 yards and 6 touchdowns. That's right on par with what Hunter Renfro did. Matter of fact, I think that would have been more than Hunter Renfro ever had in a single season. Yeah, it would have. His highest was 602, and he did that in 14 games because they were a team that made the playoff. That was in 2017.
Yeah.
So I think Avery, and I think him getting hurt last year also factored into that. I think if Avery would have finished the year putting up those numbers, maybe you have a different opinion, which is understandable. Again, I'm not criticizing people for underrating Avery Davis. It's more of just this kid's been pretty clutch for Notre Dame, and it's not always about the production. It's also about when that production comes.
Sure.
And like I even think about last year in the Purdue game. And it's just like, the offense is just really struggling and they just can't get going. And then all of a sudden, Avery just busts out a 60-yard touchdown pass. And it's like, okay, that was pretty big moment in that game that kind of sparked the offense a little bit. I mean, you look at it, Notre Dame was a 10-6 game in the third quarter. Notre Dame was struggling and bam, that's kind of what helped Notre Dame start to pull away. Purdue scored back, but it's like that score made it closer where Avery kind of put them up, put some distance early on. So I think Avery Davis is a kid that is a very important piece of this. And him being healthy is going to be a very important part of Notre Dame's offense being successful this year.
Completely
very
agree.
Important aspect to it.
And everybody talks about the depth at wide receiver and things of that nature. I think with a healthy Avery Davis, I'm not saying you forget about the depth situation, but that is going to help immensely because he eats snaps and those can be productive snaps. Okay. And he can also be the leader in that room because obviously he's been around for a long time. Braden Lindsey as well. But I think more so Avery Davis, just because, he used to be a quarterback. And when you're a quarterback, you're used to kind of taking on that leadership role, et cetera, just because of the position that you play. And the fact that he has taken on wide receiver in the manner that he has, he's clearly a leader. I mean, there's no question about that. So I think the leadership off the field, I think the production on the field, if he's healthy, we're going to be talking a lot of.
I didn't even mention that he was a captain last year.
Right.
I didn't mention that. Right. Like, completely. I just underrated a guy that I said is underrated. I didn't even talk about like the aspect of the fact that this kid brings he brings a quarterback mentality.
Right.
To the receiver position because he was a quarterback. It's that calm demeanor, that leadership, that, hey guys, we're going to be fine. Cause that's what quarterbacks do. Right. That's how you're supposed to be. And, it was like a key part of that. So yes, I feel like he is a kid that doesn't get enough love. And in my defense of him, I didn't even talk about one of the most important aspects of him, which I think, again, it's just so much of that gets underrated that even I didn't talk about.
Could not agree. He's always been one of my favorite players, to be honest with you, and I was devastated when he got hurt. I'm just hoping he's
like, man, this kid's been through enough in his career. Like, really, does he need that?
Exactly. And he was able to do a lot of the individual drills and things of that nature during spring ball. So I fully anticipate him being 100%, not only just for the summer and the workouts and all of that, but going into fall camp as well. So just hoping he can be healthy moving forward because I think he'll be a huge part of this offense, both on and off the field.
Mm-hmm. I think me having Buckner in the disrespected category just got proven. I saw a comment that compared him to Andrew Hendricks.
Yeah, I saw that. What are you talking about, man?
Okay. But I mean, I think that's part of the fun though of this whole thing though, Vince, honestly. I mean, we're talking about underrated and disrespected, but like if everybody just jumped in here and had the same exact opinion on everything, it just would make for really boring shows. And so, but it's just kind of like, but it's kind of fun to give that back and forth and doing all those kind of things. But I think Avery Davis is that guy.
Here we go. This is a fun one right here. The whole team is underrated. Can't wait.
There you go.
There you go. It's a short show. Boom, 5 seconds. We're done.
Yeah. That I don't think people would have liked that very much.
No, I don't think so either. What a great comment from Mike. I appreciate that. That was good.
Nothing personal kind of mentions it though. He says, I like Avery Davis, but I think everyone is too excited for Styles Merriweather and what we've heard Lindsey could become. That's exactly my point. Like you're making my point, which like that's it. It's like everybody's looking for that other guy that's going to step up, and we forget like Notre Dame has and keep talking about like nobody has anybody proven at receiver, and I'm like, yeah, they kind of do.
Right.
His name's Avery Davis. He's still on the team.
And he's the most proven guy that they've got coming back. There's no question about that. So he's going to need help. He's going to need help. I mean, absolutely. The guys that he mentioned right there, I have a lot of faith in what Lorenzo Styles can do. I mean, Tobias Merriweather is it's just a different conversation. It's not that I don't have faith in him, but he's probably just now getting on campus this week, right? So it's a different conversation for him. And then Braden Lindsey's a different conversation as well because he's shown flashes, but not the consistency. Avery Davis has shown all of those things. He just needs to stay healthy, and that's it. So, yeah, he is by far the most proven guy they have coming back, and that's a great place to start.
I'd like to point out in regards to Tyler Buckner's accuracy that he completed passes at a higher level last year than Bryce Young did as a freshman. Just wanted to point that out. So, but, accuracy is not only about completion percentage, but I think
it's part of it. It's part of the conversation.
I think that I think it just kind of adds to that conversation. So, Vince, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to have as of now, a brief Q&A because we don't have a ton of questions, but we're going to get into sort of the daily mailbag. So again, if you have some questions, you want to get them in now. So that's going to do it for the first part of the show in regards to the disrespected and underrated players. We'll have other thematic topics like this throughout the summer. As we kind of dive into our offseason analysis. We're going to have position previews coming up here very soon and some other type of things. And, of course, we are working on getting the Sean Stiers show launched, which is going to – that's not what it's called. It's Sean Stiers is going to have a show. We haven't come up with a name yet, but we're hoping to launch that here in the next couple of weeks as well, which will be fun. And he'll take some different angles, and Vince will be on the show with him at times, and we're going to have some fun with that. But that's going to do it for this part of the show. Again, reminder, we're not going anywhere because we got some questions, but we will have another show today sometime about 4:30, 5 o'clock. We haven't decided on the time yet. Waiting to hear back from Ryan. But we will have a second show today, which is why you need to not only hit the like button. All right, let me take this comment away so people can see it. So you have no excuses. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you'll know when we're coming up here in a little bit. So
number 76.
Yep. So definitely want to do that. So Vince, let's dive into some questions. First, before we do, we have a super chat from B Place. I really, really, really appreciate you. So just wanted to check in and say thanks for all you guys do. Looking forward to this season. Our defense has me really excited. Fast and athletic, recipe for some fun football. I think that also leads to something that is an underrated aspect of this team. I don't know if Notre Dame's going to be a great team this year. There's understandable questions about Notre Dame, like there are about a lot of teams. This is the time of the year for that. What I think the aspect of the team that I feel is underrated, however, is the speed. I don't think people realize, outsiders and even some people that follow the team, if Notre Dame's not good this year, it won't be because of speed. It'll be because of other factors. It's not going to be because, they just weren't fast enough. Like maybe a position or two, which everybody has that spot. I worry about the speed opposite of Cam Hart at corner, right? That's it. That's that's about, you're going to have speed in the backfield. You have speed at receiver. You have speed at linebacker, speed in the secondary at all but one position. Speed is not going to be this football team's problem. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think that is a very underrated aspect of this football team.
Well, I was just going to say, the other day when we were on campus and I was watching Al Golden kind of bounce around at the Irish Invasion, man. You want to talk about a guy who just looks excited to be where he's at, man. Like he was just moving and grooving and talking to guys, and he looked like he was enjoying himself. So it's almost like I feel like he's got a new lease on his coaching life a little bit. Like he's ready and he's excited. And how could you not be excited after you pop in the film and you're watching the defense that he is now in control of move around? You know what I mean? Like it was just fun to watch, to be honest with you, because it's the first time I've really seen him interact, with a lot of the players and things of that nature, kind of on an extended basis. And man, he just looks like he's feeling good about himself. That's for sure. Yep. No doubt about it. Let's get to some more. I have a couple questions that go into sort of the topic of conversation that we had today. Garen Knutson with a question. Who is the most disrespected coach? And is it Tom Rees? So especially since, Garen, you spell his name wrong. That's pretty disrespectful, man. I'm totally kidding. Just going to say that, though.
I think there's only one coach. There's two. There's two in the conversation for me. One is Mike Mickens. The other is Tommy Rees.
Okay.
And I think both of them don't get enough credit. I think both of them get too much blame is really what I think the disrespect is. And it's like last year, I've heard people say, well, they didn't make adjustments in the second half. If you're still holding on to the notion that they didn't make adjustments in the second half, you're just not having a realistic conversation. Now, you could say they didn't make good adjustments in the second half, but they definitely made adjustments in the second half. And it's just that when your offensive line is getting worked the way that they are, and you don't have a receivers coach that has taught guys how to get off the line of scrimmage, and the other team's answer to you at halftime is to come press. It's like you don't have a lot of things in your tool belt. Well, okay, he's the offensive coordinator, he's responsible for all that. Fair enough. But then have that conversation, and you're assuming that 28-year-old Tommy Rees was able to walk into Brian Kelly's office and say, hey, fire Jeff Quinn and Dell Alexander, because when Chip Long tried that, he got fired. Okay. And then they tried to sabotage his career. And it was all gone. It was all around Chip walking into Brian Kelly's office and saying, I need a new O-line coach. And it was pretty much the end of Chip Long's career at Notre Dame.
Right.
And so the precedent was set. Don't complain about the O-line coach. Simple as that, right? And so what was he supposed to do? And I think that hurt him. But look, he's got a lot to prove, right? Coach Rees is going to get an opportunity this season to shut everybody up. He doesn't need me to defend him anymore. And there's things he has to prove. Can he put a staff? Can he get a staff on the same page? Can he get everybody working together? Can he accept everybody that's on the staff? Get everybody into the right positions and all those kind of things, and then lead an offense, because He's got to build the culture and all those other type of things.
And he had a lot of say in the staff as it stands now. He had a lot of say in who those guys are. So not that we were making excuses for him before, because we weren't, but we're not going to have the same excuses or the same reasoning behind defending Tommy Rees, if that's the case, if that's where we go, because he put the staff together. I mean, so he has the guys in place that he wants, or that he and Marcus Freeman wanted. But Marcus Freeman gave him a lot of say in who is going to be on that staff. So I think Tommy Rees is going to be able to shut a lot of people down as far as, the naysayers. I do think that that's going to happen. But if he doesn't, then more blame is going to be placed on him, and rightfully so, to be honest with you. The same excuses are not in place that they were in the past.
Right. And there was a good one here. Somebody talking about people putting in their underrated, overrated. Here's a good one. Michael Vincent, the snapper. Milk. I kept waiting on him to get beat out because there's a scholarship snapper on the team, and never did. And you never hear his name mentioned in games, which is exactly what you want. There's like a few positions in football where you never want to hear a guy's name mentioned. Right. Snapper, or not football, but in sports, you don't ever want to hear someone's name, or umpires in baseball, right? Like, officials, referees, and snappers, right? You never want to hear them talk about, because usually when someone's talking about a snapper, it's because he did something wrong. And you never hear Michael Vincent's name mentioned. Why? Because he is just money. I mean, he just does his job well, snap after snap after snap after snap. And, we don't even talk about the fact that there's a scholarship snapper on the team anymore.
Who has his own NIL deal, by the way.
Right.
So there's that
Walk
too.
on snapper NIL deal. Sure. Right. Yeah, so love it.
Anybody says that Notre Dame doesn't have reach as far as NIL is concerned, when the walk-on snapper has an NIL deal, everybody just kind of needs to take a step back and realize.
Yeah, but I love the coach. Leave it to a coach to mention the snapper too, right? But I thought that was a very fair. I'm not putting him on the most, because at the end of the day, a running back still is more. The course of a year is going to have a bigger impact on a snapper. Sure. But I do think that's we don't talk about him. He's really good at what he does. He really is. Coach Bent with another question. This is a good one, Vince. Who is the most underrated incoming freshman based on recruiting rankings?
I'm going to let you take this one just because it's more of a recruiting question, but
you don't want to dive into the recruiting questions, huh? You make me always handle them.
I handle this one because I know you're going to come up with a really good answer as I'm sifting through the list in my head.
I'll say the guy that I think that I have I'll go two ways with it. Number one is I'll say, just based on recruiting rankings, it depends on kind of where you're looking at it, right? Like Jadarian Price was underrated. I had him as a top 100 recruit, but he was in the 200s, so it's not like he was like, oh, wow, criminally underrated. I think Tobias Merriweather was underrated by some. He was ranked number 218 by On3, 185 by ESPN. I think those are absurd. SI All-American, I have at 46. I think 47, that's more accurate. But I think a guy that I thought just deserved, that never kind of got the respect that he deserved as a recruit, is Nolan Zigler. That's the guy. You could say Ashton Craig, but like, to me, I don't have Ashton Craig ranked super high. Now, his upside grade is really high, but his current grade is lower because he's an undersized guy. He's got to put on weight and all that. It's a lot like Joe Alt, right? But Nolan Zigler, to me, I never understood why he wasn't a top 200 player. Sure. Just dynamic player in high school, impact guy on defense, played against some big time. Plays in a game against Drake Bowen, and they win that game, and he has a phenomenal game. He was ranked number 231 overall by 247 Sports. Nobody else ranked him in there. No, not in the Rivals 250, not in the On3 top 250, not in the ESPN 300. He's ranked 308 composite. That's a top 150 to 200 football player. I thought he was vastly underrated based on the rankings. But my other guy that I think you can make an even bigger case for is Benjamin Morrison. I thought Benjamin Morrison was criminally underrated last year. You're talking about a kid that On3 has a 3-star. ESPN had him as the number 45 cornerback in the country. If there are 44 corners better than Benjamin Morrison, you know what I'm going to say, Vince. It's the best cornerback class in the history of high school football. The highest ranking for him was Rivals had him as the number 28 corner in the country. I think he is the most criminally underrated player. Now I'll give another one. Who do I think has a chance to prove to be the most underrated player by me, the guy that I'm not giving the most respect to, I think it's going to be Steve Angeli.
Yeah,
Because
that's fair.
I'm not high on Steve Angeli. I've never been high on Steve Angeli.
Yeah.
But he just, I mean, he's just you just kind of go look at. I was kind of busting his chops a little bit the other day about the end of the blue gold game. Somebody was talking about. I was like, "Come on, guys! It was a spring game." He just laughed. He's a good kid, and but in that moment, you kind of saw what people talk about with him. It's like the dude's just calm and cool and does what he needs to do to win games, and I think he could end up being the guy that, there's always a kid in every class that you look back and you're like, boy, that guy was way better than I thought he was going to be. Like I had Kyron Williams, underrated and all that. If I'm looking through the list, the guy that I think has a chance to prove me to be like Chance Tucker was that guy in the 2021 class that I thought could really make me, prove me wrong. I think Steve Angeli could be the guy that would have a shot to do that to me and college based on what we've seen so far from him.
Look, I was impressed with Steve in spring practice. I thought he held his own. He carried his weight. I mean, I thought he did a really good job for a kid that's still supposed to be in high school, right? It's just the physical tools I'm not sure about yet. I don't know that he's got. I mean, if
and
you
that's
look
where
at
I'm coming from, right?
And it's nothing against the kid himself. I think he's got a great head on his shoulders. I think he can be a really, really good number 2. You know what I mean? Similar to how I view Drew Pine, in that kind of same neighborhood. Like, can they go in and get you a win? Yeah. Is he going to be your starting quarterback for the rest of the way? You know what I mean? Like, is he the guy that you recruit to be your starting quarterback? I don't know the answer to that. You know what I mean? I don't know that he's got the physical tools to be that guy, especially with who they have on the roster right now and who they're recruiting. You know what I mean? Is he better than, a Dante Moore, a CJ Carr, a Tyler Buckner? Like, I think right now the answer is no, but it would not surprise me if he proved me wrong in that he could put the team on his shoulders and they could rally behind him. And I could say the same thing about Drew Pine. And so that's actually a compliment from me that I'm lumping Steve Angeli in with Drew Pine. So, we'll see what happens, but I agree with you that he could be a guy that, you could be wrong about only because of his production at Notre Dame. I don't think you're wrong about his tools. I think if you're going to be wrong, it's going to be because of his production. And his intangibles
override the physical tools.
And I will say that I was in the same boat with Ian Book, for example. When he came into Notre Dame, I was like, good, great. He'll be a great number 2. But he definitely
he should have been. He should have been.
But his production,
with all due respect, he should have been a number 2.
I know. I'm just saying his production proved me wrong in what I thought he was going to be at Notre Dame. So I'll say that.
Yep. All right, let's get down to some more questions here, Vince. Mr. Sanders asks, will Marcus Freeman get Michigan back onto the schedule before 2030? I doubt it, and I hope not.
Yeah, I don't know that that's really something that's on his checklist of things to do.
I mean, you all know my stance on this one. I have zero interest in playing Michigan. I don't think Michigan does anything playing Michigan does nothing for Notre Dame. And I would much rather see the team that didn't sabotage Notre Dame's Big Ten pursuits twice because of anti-Catholicism and other prejudices, and that would be Michigan. And so I'd rather play Michigan State, the team that always had Notre Dame's back. And so I would much rather. There's 5 Big Ten teams I'd rather see Notre Dame play, which is going to be a show topic here. Vince and I haven't gone over the schedule this week yet. Somebody forgot to call me yesterday when they got off work. I don't know, point fingers at anybody, but I think it's going to be this week. It may be next week. We'll have to see. How that plays out. But we're going to do that kind of like what's the ideal schedule, teams we'd like to see on and off. Who do we definitely never want to see? All that. It'll be fun. But Michigan's not a team you're ever going to hear me say I want them on the schedule. I just do not care. If Notre Dame over the next 50 years, Notre Dame plays Michigan as many times as they've played Ohio State the last 50 years, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Right.
Perfectly fine.
Right. Me
too.
too.
Which is like what, 4, right? And like 3 of them are bowl, like 4 times, and then half of them are bowl games. Totally fine with that. Totally fine with that. Thoughts on that, Vince?
I think of all the teams in the Big Ten that I don't want to see, that I could care less. I shouldn't say I don't want to see, but it doesn't bother me that they don't play them. I just that's 1 week of nonsense I don't have to worry about, and I get those days of my life back. So yeah, I'm happy about that.
Yep. Got a super chat down here from got a couple down here. We got one from Brandon Plesners. He says Is the Notre Dame staff content with landing Page over Freeling, hearing more and more that Otting is a take, and it's coming down to Freeling and Jagasol for the 5th spot? I guess we'll have to see on that, right? I don't dive too much into that, but yes, Otting earned himself as a take during the camp this past week, so he is a take at Notre Dame. I don't want to talk too much about this one, Brandon. Let's just say we'll address it more later today. I'll just kind of leave it at that, right? But I think they would be content with that. I'm not sure I agree with it. And we had another question kind of related to this that I thought kind of dove into it as well. John Saxton said off topic, you stated yesterday you wouldn't take 6-0 linemen. I said actually the opposite. What if Notre Dame lands Otting, Page, Jagasol, and then Freeling comes calling? Do you take 6 in that scenario? I said yesterday, Jason, I don't think Notre Dame would take 6 based on conversations I've had. What I said was, I said I'm vehemently and belligerently opposed to taking 6 offensive linemen, but I'd make an exception this year, is what we said yesterday. I would make an exception this year. I'd go with fewer players next year, 6 this year. I think there's some kids that you're going to want to process out a little bit the right way. So there's some injury issues kind of going on. I think the fact that you have like Elijah Page and Joe Otting would be sort of project-ish type of guys that are going to need time, especially Otting and Freeling as play as a freshman kind of guy. I mean, to me, if Monroe Freeling comes in, I'm playing him as a freshman. I'm rotating him in when you have blowouts, I'm getting him maybe on some PAT. I mean, he's just not a 5-year guy to me, kind of like Blake Fisher wasn't a 5-year guy. So yeah, I think he's a guy that I could feel comfortable. I think Sam Pendleton's a guy that might need a little bit of time to, kind of develop as a player. So I think you could space those guys out a little bit with some red shirts, and some guys aren't red shirting, that it would make sense for me to bring 6 in this year's class. But I'm of the belief that if Monroe Freeling wants to come, I don't care how many kids you have committed. You can't not take Monroe Freeling. But it's not my decision. And I don't know where the Notre Dame staff is on that. I'm still trying to get clarity on that. I know other people are just kind of throwing their opinion out. They could end up being right. But I've been told no by a source. Another source I'm going to try to find out from, because there's just some reasons, and we'll dive into it a little bit later. But Brandon, we'll be able to address that a little bit more later today. Christopher Morgan with the Super Chat the other day, you said that if we run the table this year, staff might leave to be head coaches or get promoted at other schools. What underrated coaches elsewhere would you like to see at Notre Dame, and why?
Ooh, didn't we just go through all these? Like we just got a bunch of these.
I mean, for me, I haven't really got into that yet, Christopher. I mean, I love those questions because they're good. I mean, there's a lot of good position coaches out there. I mean, we talked about some when we were going through the position searches this year. I think the guy that went to Washington, Shepard from Purdue is a really underrated coach. I don't think it's enough love. There's some really good O-line coaches. The guy from Kentucky that Alabama just hired was really underrated until Bama scooped him up. So, and like the OC at Kentucky was on my list of if Tommy Rees leaves list, but he just got the offensive coordinator job at the Rams. So he's no longer underrated and no longer a guy that you're going to be able to hire in a couple of years should Tommy Rees leave. So, a guy that if Al Washington were to leave for the D-line job, like a guy that I would like to see Notre Dame look at is like Larry Black, who's at Vanderbilt. He just left Toledo to go to Vanderbilt. If he can have some success in the SEC, with those recruiting and developing kids at Vanderbilt, he could put himself in position for some much bigger and better things. But other than that, there's not a lot of names that I could kind of give you that would be considered underrated. I think most of the guys that I'd say, hey, I'd like to see that guy would be known commodities and not really underrated guys. But, I think that's going to be the interesting thing with Coach Freeman is what kind of relationships is he able to build over the next few years with other coaches.
Right.
To say, hey, look, if an opening comes up, because that's the way it works a lot in this business is, you develop relationships with, hey, I really respect what this guy does over at so-and-so. And so you build that, relationship with him at clinics and camps and different things. And you say, babe, if we ever have an opening come up, hey, we'd love to talk to you, that kind of thing. And those are kind of how some of those,
That's how it works. That's how it works at the high school level. Man, I'm telling you.
Oh, absolutely.
Conversations that happen all the time, both at the college level and the high school level. It's like, hey, if I ever get a head coaching job or if something opens up on my staff, like I'm coming to talk to you.
I've had people I know that have asked me that in the last 5-6 years. Like, hey, man, if I got a job, would you? Well, you've asked me that.
Like me.
A few years ago, like before I did this, like, hey, man, and I was like, I think my coaching days are my coaching days are behind me. But but that's what the point is. But that's what you do. If you're thinking of becoming a head coach, you kind of have a list of guys you'd like to work with,
always,
and you find out who would be interested in that job. And then, of course, you see coaches who, boy, this team gives us a hard time every year. Who's their DB coach? Oh, okay, that guy. Yeah, I like what that guy does. So that would be a very interesting aspect of it. The Sunset Kid says, Brian, if CJ Carr commits to Notre Dame, do you think Moore commits somewhere else? I don't really want to dive into that too much. I think there's a lot of stuff being thrown around that's not sourced enough, to be honest with you, to really feel comfortable with it. I will say this. I'll have an opinion on Dante Moore here in a couple days. I've got some opinions now, but I'm really trying to make sure that I don't just fly off the handle and just throw out the first thing that somebody tells me to be first. I'm trying to get information from all sides of this. The only thing I can say confidently right now is that Notre Dame taking CJ Carr right now has nothing to do with Dante Moore. Nothing. Right. It's simply that anyone that's been on the Irish Breakdown message board has known since like February that I have been saying Tom Rees loves CJ Carr. Every time somebody mentioned Julian saying what we would always say, look, he's not the number one quarterback on their board. It's CJ Carr. CJ Carr is the guy that Tom Rees has been targeting for a long time. And the reality is you can't say no to him if the other kid's trying to wait forever. You just can't. If you thought Dante Moore was going to commit when you thought he was going to, and when he kind of indicated early, like sometime this summer, then you could tell CJ, hey, let's wait till after Dante commits. But the reality is the notion of Dante taking this into the season is growing more and more and more and more. I think some influences around him are pushing more and more for him to take this thing on. I think there are some anti-Notre Dame forces around him that are making it to where Notre Dame is just, we can't take that chance. And so with the uncertainty around Dante Moore, and again, I'll get into some more later, have some more on the board, but I want to, do my due diligence first and not just throw out something clickbaity. Right. And I'm not saying anyone else did. I'm saying I'm not going to do that. I want to make sure I get enough from all sides on this. And with CJ, all I can say is what I don't want people to – this is what I'm at, but I don't want people coming into this with CJ Carr thinking Notre Dame sped something up with him or they're taking him in reaction to – Notre Dame is taking CJ Carr because they want him, and he decided he wanted to speed up his own process.
He was the targeted guy in the 24 class.
Correct. Has been for a long time. I've been saying that. Right. But the staff also did their due diligence. They talked to Avery Davis. They tried to get him on campus. He was going to try to visit this summer. They had Julian saying on campus multiple times. They really liked Raiola a lot, the kid from out west. But CJ Carr has been their number one target forever. They view him as a five-star quarterback. And they could not, in good conscience, tell him no or wait because they're waiting on Dante Moore when you have no idea when Dante Moore is going to make a decision. So his decision was about CJ decided because of his relationship with Tommy Rees that I want to make a decision soon. And if you're Notre Dame and he wants to pick you, you're going to take him. Now, we're going to find out where he's going to go in 2 days, right? And we all feel good about where Notre Dame is. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend like we don't, but the reality is that you can't tell a kid, in theory, you can't tell a kid like that no who wants to come this soon, right? Because you're waiting on another kid who has not given you any idea what he wants to do timeline wise. So those two things don't go hand in hand. Now, there's some other things. The timing is going to make it look like that because some other things, but I'll address those type of things later as we kind of get deeper into this. But I know there were some others. Tom asked, why are people talking about Carr reclassifying? Is it pure speculation or has there been a hint? I think it's a little bit of both. There have been some potential hints, but it's a lot of this stuff is just people just drawing
too. Like that's a lot of high school left as far as credits and stuff are concerned.
Yeah, it's you just at Notre Dame you can't just up and decide I'm going to reclassify tomorrow and it's okay. Like, do I think that there will be conversations with CJ Carr about that if he picks Notre Dame on Thursday? Which again, we feel good about where they stand. No, we're not, not going to be stupid here and act like we don't think that when it's obvious from everything that that's the case. Are there going to be conversations about it? I think so. Because, if you could reclassify him, then you could say, hey, we could still take Julian Saying. They're in different classes now, right? I mean, so there could be those conversations, but I'm not a huge fan of that, to be honest with you. I'm not a huge fan. I said it yesterday. I'm not a huge fan of reclassifying, especially for a quarterback who's not already a big kid. Like the Raiola kid, I would kind of understand him reclassifying because he's a big kid. Like he's physically, I think, a kid that's ready to play.
Carr's not
What's
a huge
that?
kid. Carr's
No,
not a
you
huge
saw that yesterday. We were talking about this. You and I were talking about this, Vince. He's like 6'2.5", because he was standing next to Coach Freeman, and we were like, okay, he's at least an inch taller than Coach Freeman, but that's about it. So 6'2.5", 6'3". What'd you say about like a $185?
Yeah, he's skinny. Like he
Yeah.
needs beef.
Yeah.
I mean, he
Right.
needs to hit.
He just needs to be allowed to mature like every other rising junior in high school is allowed to mature. That's what it comes down to.
I try to compare him to like my son and his friends. They're all rising sophomores, right? So he looks like he's a year older than those kids. You know what I mean? And it's like he just needs to mature and get bigger and get in the weight room and all of those different things. And that takes time. And that's how Mother Nature operates, right? So I loved what I saw from him when we saw him in person. I loved it, but does he look like a college quarterback right now?
No.
He doesn't.
And there's so much that goes into it that it's way too early to be having those conversations.
Right.
Way too early to have those conversations. Let's get on to some more here, Vince, because I was reading someone's name, a question. Didn't see Chris Smith, so we're not going to address that one from Keith. Keith has great questions, but we just haven't seen Chris Smith in person, so you can't really comment on that. Jonathan Fish says, if Avery Davis comes back full strength, do you see him having an Arnaz battle 2002 types year and then parlay that into a decent NFL career like Arnaz did? If he comes back healthy, I definitely think he can be an NFL player and an NFL player for a while. I think athletically, he's like the key is like just the unknown now is with Avery's. I just don't know I don't know how his injury was. Like, how's he going to come back? But if he comes back full strength the way he was before, I think he's a late round pick. I think Avery's going to test in the 4. He's going to run in the 4.4s, I believe. And he's going to have, 100+ career catches. So, yeah, I think he'll have a chance to be an NFL player. I don't know if I think him and Arnaz are a little bit different type of athletes, but, I could see something like that. But I think Arnaz was just more of kind of an athlete playing receiver at Notre Dame, where Avery's going into his third year of playing the position. I feel like Vince, he has a chance to be a more productive player. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. And
so Arnaz just got by on athleticism. So like the numbers, like to the point, John, the numbers could maybe be there, 58 catches for 786 yards is what I'm looking at here. The numbers could be there, but I think the difference is Arnaz was Notre Dame's, he was their top target that year. I think the reason I think the numbers for Avery won't be there is I don't think Avery's going to be the number one target the way that Arnaz was in 2002. So I think a year similar to what he did last year, on what he was on pace for last year, would 44 catches, 600+ yards, 6 touchdowns is about what I think he is capable of this year. Could he get to Arnaz? Maybe. Yeah. But I think the other thing too is this team's going to run a lot more. It's going to run the ball effectively as well, which is going to, and that would combine with the fact that he's maybe your third option, right? Mayer's one. I think Styles is going to be the number one target at receiver. Plus, you have Braden Lindsey doing some things. You'll have Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas, Tobias Merriweather, the backs. I think the ball. We said this last year too, Vince, and it turned out to be kind of true. Is I think the ball is going to get spread around a lot more, which is going to prevent the numbers from really skyrocketing. But I think the clutchness is what we're going to like from that. Could Houston Griffith be underrated? Where is he on the depth chart? I think no. I don't think he's underrated. I think Houston has had plenty of opportunities to prove himself, and up to this point in time in his career, Vince, he has not taken full advantage of those opportunities. So he could retroactively make it seem like he's underrated by a big season, but I don't think right now I'd be comfortable saying he was underrated. How about you, Vince, on that?
I expected more, to be honest with you, from Houston, and maybe he can still reach the expectations that I have for him. So I can't call him underrated based on what he's been able to accomplish thus far, because he hasn't even hit where I've rated him, to be honest with you. So I don't think he's underrated. He might be a little overrated at this point, to be perfect. I mean, for me, he might be a little bit overrated. I held him in a little bit more high regard than what he's been able to accomplish so far. So definitely not underrated for me. And if he doesn't have a big year this year, then he's definitely not underrated across the country. So he's going to have to really step up. And I think at this point, I'm not even sure if he's going to be the starter. So if you're not even the starter, I don't know how you could be underrated. But it's a really good question.
Right. Agree with that. Agree. John Leahy says, what position is Prince Colley going to play this year and going forward? This year, I expect him to be a will, but I think he could move around a lot.
I think he's going to start at will as well.
Very flexible. Not start at will, meaning the position he's going to play is what we're referring to. Not he's going to start. He's not going to be the starting will.
Starting at the position of will in practice.
I knew what you meant. I just wanted to make sure that
right.
Driscoll and Vince said that, you know how it goes.
Not what I meant at all.
Yep. John Murray says some of the fresh and sophomore corners are very talented, will compete for playing time. What do you think? I agree. Again, that's part of the reason that we think that, the freshmen especially. I think most people acknowledge that the freshman corners are talented, especially Jaden Mickey, because he's proven it. I love Benjamin Morrison. I think the sophomore class is the one that's underrated the most because they were all 3 stars for the most part. Like Tucker's a 3-star. Barnes is a 3-star, and so there's just the assumption that they can't play, or at least at a high level. So I think they're talented. I think they need at least one of the sophomores or freshmen to step up and really be a force this year. They just need at least one. If there's more than one, that's even better. And I would hope that at least one steps up and performs. But yeah, I'll be surprised if we don't see some impact from the freshman and sophomore class, John. Very, very much so. Michael Rudiger said that Zeke Correll's underrated. And I think that's I can understand why you'd say that, because
I can too.
Here's why I would disagree with you. Okay. I think Zeke is a very talented player. We're under the belief, based on the sort of things we've been told by sources, that there's a good chance he's going to end up starting at center this year if he continues in the fall what he's done in the spring and summer and stays healthy. But he was so bad last year in the starting lineup that it's hard for me to criticize someone for not thinking he's not being excited about him. I get that. I don't agree with it. I think that there's a lot of reasons why Zeke struggled last year. He was a kid that was moved a position. He was a guy that was not coached worth a darn, and just couldn't
He's
play.
Kind of hanging out dry, to be honest.
Exactly. I think it's a good way of putting it, Vince.
Yeah. He was playing out of position, like we talked about. I mean, to a layman, they can, what's the difference between center and guard? Well, there's a big difference between center and guard, and he's just a really good center. And I think he's proven that. I think he has the track record to prove that he's a good center, and they wouldn't be contemplating starting him at center and moving a potential All-American center to guard if he wasn't really good at center. So he's definitely not overrated by the coaching staff, and he's definitely not, or I should say he's definitely not underrated by the coaching staff. He's definitely not underrated by us. I was disappointed in how he played last year, but as Brian said, there were extenuating circumstances that kind of led to that. I was hoping he would play better because I am a big Zeke Correll fan, and I'm glad that he has proven himself to potentially get the opportunity to start at center. You're not moving in an All-American center to guard if the guy that you're thinking about putting at center isn't really good. So he's definitely not underrated by Harry Hiestand and Marcus Freeman. That's well put, Vince. I think the other thing too is that playing center more naturally, the action of snapping naturally forces you to keep your pads lower. That's a good point.
And I think that Zeke didn't keep his pads low last year, and again, that's a coaching problem, and it was never corrected. And I think that hurt him. Vince, you and I both know that's one of there's like 3 things that Harry Hiestand just preaches like constantly.
Yeah.
Drive, right? But it's like that's the overarching thing, drive. But the aspects of that are stay low, work your feet, use your hands, right? I mean, that's where it comes from. They're always doing those drives where they always drive a guy 10 yards off the ball in drills and things like that. But the foundation of it is, stay low, move your feet, use your hands, right? And he didn't do any of those things last year. He was face-to-face catching all game. He was staying high, and he wasn't moving his feet. Right. And when you're 6'2.5", 6'3", 295 pounds, that is a recipe for disaster. It's a coaching thing because Zeke didn't have that problem in 2020 who was working with them primarily? Chris Watt, not Jeff Quinn. And so, and he didn't do that in high school. I mean, again, it was something that wasn't emphasized and coached into him enough. And if that changed in the spring, when we saw in the spring, he's blocking 10, 15 yards down the field. You know, he had a great blue gold game and apparently had a great spring. Now he's got to go out and prove it again in the fall.
No question.
That's the big key. So that's why I can't sit there and say I'm going to criticize someone for not viewing him as underrated. He's got a lot to prove, but I think he's going to be a big surprise. I think he's going to be a big surprise for some people this year. All right, we'll get last few here before we get out of here. Sean Michael, hi, with a super chat. Thank you very much, Sean. Hi, Brian and Vince. First, wanted to thank you guys for all you do. The best there is on the Notre Dame beat. I heard Notre Dame offered Bronte Tay Johnson out of Fort Wayne. Thoughts? Thanks again, and go Irish. Yeah, we talked about this yesterday. He did get offered, right? So we wrote about that on the board on Sunday when he got offered. And then we talked about it in the show yesterday. So I'd encourage you to kind of go listen to that because we dove into what we like about him as a player. My thoughts are he's a very talented player. It's just he's going to need some work. We're going to have an article coming up on him later this afternoon. Ryan just texted me that the article is done. And I'll just give a little teaser. Bronte likes Notre Dame a lot. And you know what? I may just, because I'm in a good mood today, if the quote that Ryan gave me is in there, I may just share it with you all now because it hasn't been published yet, but you never know, right? Like throw a little love to the people in the chat who have been there with us. But I'm going to see if I can find his comment or if maybe it was an off the record comment, which is why I'm not repeating it now. Yes. Here is a quote from Bronte Johnson given to Ryan Roberts. He says, he talked about the Notre Dame offer, and this was his response to getting an offer Notre Dame. This is Bronte Johnson's direct words. Getting the offer for me was a very good feeling. They have always been my dream school and are right in my home state. So he loves Notre Dame. The question is he going to be able to do what he needs to do to make that dream become a reality off the field? But athletically, he's very gifted. He's just super raw. But as I've said a million times, I give zero you-know-whats about a guy that's raw technically, right? Now, there's two things I care about. Do you have the physical talent to play? Mm-hmm. And then there's something else I want to add that I don't know if it was in a chat or on the board that I haven't addressed yet, but somebody talked about not caring about being raw and then talked about like, you have to have the instincts. To me, that's not raw. Having instincts has nothing to do with raw. Raw comes down to either physically you need to be developed or technically you need to be developed. Right. I've seen plenty of guys who were technically underdeveloped that had an instinct. Darren Gallette, the kid from Texas we've talked about. Technically, he's very raw as a linebacker, but instinctually you see him knowing how to play football. He knows where the ball is. He can get to the football and go find the football. I think those things are there. You see that. That to me is not part of being raw. When I talk about you've got the tools, that's part of the tools that I'm talking about is kid just has a feel for the game. You can see a guy that's incredibly fundamentally sound that doesn't have instincts for the game. And that's a different animal. But Bronte, Vince, he's got the talent. But as you know, the path from north side in Fort Wayne to south to Notre Dame is not an easy one.
No doubt.
But the reality is by getting this offer early, I believe Notre Dame has given Bronte the motivation to say, hey, if you want to be here, here you go. But here's the pathway to that. And hopefully over the next couple of years, he can make that happen because there's no doubting this young man's ability. No doubting his physical ability.
He was wearing on Sunday out of curiosity.
He was one of the DBs. He was the DB that stood like 4 inches over everyone else.
Gotcha. Okay.
That was him.
Yeah. Okay.
They had him working at safety, not receiver. He's listed as a receiver by all the services, but Notre Dame was looking at him at safety.
Wow. If it's the guy I'm thinking about,
in one-on-ones, he went over. Yeah.
Yeah. He ran around on offense, and he's just a smooth character, man. I'll tell you what. Because it was a white shirt versus a white shirt.
Yep.
So it was deep
that's him.
Guy. And he just blew by whoever was trying to guard him. It was like a seam route, almost like a seam
ease.
Go. And it was
it was supposed to be a post, but he didn't really know how to run the post.
Yeah, he just.
But to your point, he still got open because
couldn't run with smooth him. Athletically.
Way. And to see a 6'3" kid look as clean as he did going through drills as a DB, because those are much more short area stuff. Mm-hmm. He looked good. He looked really good. So, yeah, if he can get the work done, I mean, I would love to see him in a Notre Dame uniform because he's talented. No. And I always want more in-state kids to be at Notre Dame. I've always felt if things are equal.
around the
Yeah.
state or whatever. Like, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
If they're a Notre Dame fit, man, get them here.
If all things are equal, I'm always taking the in-state kid
Sure.
for exactly the reason he said. That's my dream school. Like
Right.
kids that look at Notre Dame as their dream school are going to be willing to go through more, what, and stick it out than some other kids who view Notre Dame as what can you do for me type of thing. So no doubt about it. Corey Flynn says, I like Oregon and or Utah in place of Stanford. What say you guys? Also, why does Kyle Whittingham never get mentioned when there are coaching openings in college football? Let me take the latter first because Kyle Whittingham has never expressed interest in other jobs. I mean, it's a known deal that Kyle Whittingham is perfectly content. I believe he is a Mormon. I believe, Vince.
Okay.
I believe Kyle Whittingham is a Mormon. I'm not 100% certain on that, but I believe that he is. And so being in Utah, which has a very heavy Mormon influence would matter to that. I'm actually going to try to look that up to see if that is accurate. I'm not 100% certain on that, but I think he is a blue collar, hardworking type of guy. And that's what he gets at Utah. And I think he likes the fit. He's had success. He's making good money. Some coaches are smart enough to some coaches are smart enough to know, like, I got a good thing here.
Yeah.
And I can be here as long as I want. And as long as I'm working hard and putting in the work, I can be here. So I think that's the second part. Vince, what would you say if let's say Notre Dame did a 10-year contract with two teams, and it was a home and home with Utah and a home and home with Oregon, home and home in Utah, home and home in Oregon, kind of like that. 12-year contract, so that way you can get them 3 times.
Yeah.
What would you say about that?
I would be fine with it, to be perfectly honest with you. I like the way Utah plays the game. I think they're a tough physical team. I like a lot of things about Utah. They're just gritty, and I like Notre Dame playing those kinds of teams. And I would have no problem with them going to Oregon every other few years. Like I would have no problem with that because you could put to bed a lot of the Notre Dame doesn't have any speed nonsense because Oregon always has speed, right? So you'd have that aspect. I like Oregon better than Stanford from an athlete standpoint, so I'm cool with that part of it. You're getting your presence on the West Coast, which is always good as well. So I would do it just like they're doing, the USC game. So if USC is a home game, then they would play Oregon out there. And then if Oregon was a home game, then they would be playing USC out there. Same thing with Utah. So that I would still schedule it that in that regard. But I think that would be great. I think that it's a nice mix of styles too, because Oregon and Utah play completely different styles of offense. So you're going to get different styles, which I think is good. So I have nothing negative to say about that idea or that arrangement.
I think so. Siggy just said this, and I agree. I think Oregon. He says Oregon doesn't move my needle, but more than Stanford. I don't necessarily agree with the first part. I definitely agree that it definitely is better for Notre Dame than playing Stanford. I think Oregon moves the needle to a degree because I think it's still a hot program in the West. I think once they are resupplanted by USC as the best team in the Pac-12, which I expect to happen eventually, then I think that takes away some of the need to get out there and play a West Coast team. That's the thing, is like if USC is good, then Notre Dame doesn't really need to play another West Coast team. It's not a need, it's more of a want. And Oregon would make a lot of sense. I personally, I would rather see UCLA on the schedule. I'd rather see Washington on the schedule. I think those teams do more for Notre Dame. Oregon just doesn't produce the same amount of talent as Washington does. And I would like to get in Seattle and play at Washington and let all the kids see them. And there's a little bit of history with Notre Dame in Washington, not a great amount. There's a little bit, but there really isn't with Oregon or Utah. The thing about Utah is I agree with everything you said about Utah's program. I have as much respect for Kyle Whittingham and his program as any other, like, not big program in the country. My issue is that I just don't see what playing them does for Notre Dame. It's not like there's kids in Utah you're begging to get to Notre Dame. And if you beat Utah, it's like, well, yeah, it's Utah. You're supposed to beat them. But if you lose to them, and again, that's a good football program, and it's not a given that you're going to beat them. Just ask Ohio State. Like, you're not getting love for it. You're just, you know what I mean? So that's my issue. But we had a thing on the board the other day, Vince, where I had everybody say, what was the 3 biggest wins of, from Lou Holtz on, what's the 3 biggest wins of those coaches' careers? I went with Utah 2010 for Brian Kelly.
Oh, interesting.
Because they were 4-5, right? And it wasn't the third best team, but they were 4-5. That win sparked a great finish that year. If they lose that game and fall to 4-6, I think the wheels come off in year one for Brian Kelly. So bouncing back from back-to-back losses to Navy and Tulsa to beat a Utah team that at the time was ranked 15th, I think salvage that season, help them finish the year on a strong note. Like I could see it where they lose to Utah and then maybe lose to USC, right, in a game that came down to the wire. But they had some momentum going into that USC game. If you don't have any momentum because you lost to Utah and your season's over, I think the wheels fall off. They don't finish with as good of a recruiting class. There's just a lot of I don't think they would have gotten Stephon Tuitt. Because remember, he decommitted late in the process to Georgia Tech and also took a visit to Auburn late in the process. They had to flip him back, which is a really funny story, by the way. So I knew one of the Notre Dame coaches at the time, and my boss at the time did. And so we broke the story that Stephon had flipped back because he basically – told me when to call him. I called him, and he answered the phone and handed the phone to Stephon. Stephon told me he'd flip back to Notre Dame. So, very, very interesting scenario. But I don't think they do that if they're 5-7 at that point in time and weren't winning a bunch of games, right? Because they finished that season hot. I mean, you'll beat Utah, beat USC, spanked Army, and then beat Miami in a bowl game. I don't think any of that happens, and I don't know if Brian Kelly ever recovers from that if they lose to Utah. So that was a big game. And let me say this about Utah too before we move on. Their fans were awesome. I don't know if you were at that game in 2010, Vince, but they had some of the nicest, just chillest fans. Like they were having fun. They would like jab, like little, just like, but it was like fun back and forth. Like really polite, really nice, really, knowledgeable, showed a great deal of respect for being at Notre Dame. Awesome fan base.
I definitely do not remember. Yeah. That's 12 years ago.
Yeah. Really, really awesome fan base.
What I had for breakfast this morning. So
really awesome fan base, Vince. I know, right? All right. Let's try to roll through some of these. Bill Walsh's question. There seems to be a trend to recruit athletes in Notre Dame. Is that a conscious decision of the staff, or do you like it? Yes and yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Absolutely. If you get them in here, but I think the key is being honest with these guys. Like, look, we're not sure exactly where you fit, but we want you here. You know what I mean? There's a chance you play offense. There's a chance you play defense, whatever the case may be. But I love it. I mean, get the best athletes, get the best guys on campus, and then figure out where they fit. And as long as you're honest with the guys, that's the most important thing.
I had somebody say to me the other day, so we reported on the message board, and we'll say it now because it's been a few days, but that Oklahoma was back in with Micah Tease, and now it seems like they're fading again because they're adamant that they want him to be a defensive player, and he wants a shot at offense. And somebody said to me, like, I don't know if that was smart by them because now they're not going to get the kid. And I was like, no, wrong answer. The answer is props to Oklahoma for being willing to lose a kid because they were honest with him. Like, we need more of that from coaches as opposed to lying to him and then knowing you're giving him no chance to play. Props to them. But that's to your point, Vince. I say that to your point of be honest with the kid. Be willing to lose a kid because you were honest with him, then lie to him to get there because
especially this day and age with the way you can transfer and enter the portal and all that. If you lie to a kid and you're like, hey, I know we told you were going to play receiver, but you're going to be playing corner for us. They're going to be like,
you just wasted a year for both of you.
Exactly. Right. And that's not okay.
Yep. Agree. So I think it's easier too to for the positional flexibility, those kids that can be legit, like Ronan Hannafin can be a legitimate starter at multiple positions, right? Micah Tease can be that kind of guy. I think guys like that are invaluable. Absolutely. They really are.
It's almost like you get it's like a 2-for-1. You know what I mean? You're almost getting two players for one scholarship.
Yep. A poet mine asks, do you think we work well as a 3-4 or would the D be better as a 4-3? We are technically a 3-3-5, I think. Actually, Notre Dame is a 4-2-5. Vince, so what are your thoughts on that, Vince? Do you think Notre Dame should be 3-4? Do you think it should be 4-3, 3-3-5, or 4-2-5? What are your thoughts?
I know this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but I want them to be multiple. I want them to be able to be effective with 3 down and 4 down. Personally, I like a 4 down look. I do, but I like to have the option of dropping a guy with the same personnel, and obviously they can do that with some of the guys that they have. But I like a 4 down personnel standpoint
as the base.
As the base. But I think you have to be multiple because especially at a place like Notre Dame, you're playing multiple styles of offense. So you need to be multiple and it might change game to game, but I think from a base standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, I think I do like a 4-2-5 a heck of a lot better than I do a 3-3-5.
Yep. All right. So let's see here. Justin Carlson, can CJ have the same program-changing impact as Dante Moore? To a degree, yeah. To a degree, I don't know. I don't know if CJ is. I don't think that CJ is necessarily. Trying to think how to say this. I don't know if CJ is yet the national name that Dante is, but part of that is because Dante has emerged as a national name over the last year, going from his sophomore to junior season. CJ's kind of in the middle of that. But Vince, you saw this more than I did because you were by the quarterbacks most of the time at the in Irish Invasion. Kids flocked to CJ Carr. The other top prospects flocked to CJ Carr that entire time. So I think to a degree he can.
Well, and he just, and I will preface this with, I have not seen Dante Moore in a setting like I was able to witness CJ Carr, because they didn't allow us to be around Irish Invasion and things of that nature in the past, right? And so, but he just had an aura about him. He just had a kind of a, I don't want to say cocky because that gives off the wrong, but he had a swagger about him, and that was magnetic to these guys. It was magnetic to the quarterbacks that were there. It was magnetic to the position players that were there. It was almost like he was somewhat running some of the drills. Like, hey, you go here, you go there. Like he owned.
He takes command.
He owned that experience. And as I was watching him, because I never watched film of him up until that day. I had never seen him. I had heard his name, obviously, with the Lloyd Carr connection and all of those different things, but I had never actually seen him with my own eyes. And I was very impressed, not only from an athletic standpoint and what he was able to do throwing the football, but just from a leadership standpoint, a swagger standpoint, and things like that. Like, that's the kind of that's what I want from my quarterback.
Right.
That's the best way to put it. That's what I would want.
And to have the kind of impact that Justin's asking about. Right. You've got to have that swagger to it. Because I think I'm reading into Justin's questions, Vince, is I think where Justin's coming from is program changing is in two regards. One is how you play, right? Sure. That's obviously number one. Number two is, do you then attract, are you that Pied Piper that we've talked about that Dante could have been? And that's the thing that Vince is pointing to, is Vince hasn't seen the kids film. He watched them throw and stuff yesterday, but it's a camp, right?
Right.
Absolutely. What Vince is referring to, it's the attributes to say kids are going to meet him and say, I want to play with that dude, is the thing that Vince is talking about. And
he mentioned, I believe in an Irish Breakdown story, when you talked about when he set his commitment date, one of his quotes was, I want to, declare where I'm going so I can recruit guys to that school. Like, he was already doing
interesting
that
concept.
I mean,
yeah.
And I'm not trying to give anything away. You had already talked about it, but he was at Notre Dame and he was going from elite recruit to elite recruit to elite recruit. And he was talking to them. I wasn't in the conversation, but it looked to me like he was, talking to him about good stuff. So I think that speaks volumes as well.
Right. I'll read something that I wrote from the Irish Invasion recap that I said before he even, let me see if I'm having the same issue. I realize that there's an issue on the site, folks. We're trying to get it fixed. So I'm having a bit of the same issue that some of you are having. But the thing I wrote, Vince, was the way he was engaging with other kids, with other players, is it's like he was basically doing recruiting. I mean, that's kind of what it was. He was basically doing recruiting. Mm-hmm. And to me, when a guy is doing that, like, it wasn't necessarily Notre Dame. It was like the way he was. He was going up to Caleb Beasley and going up to all these other guys, like, sort of like, hey, let's do this thing together. Now, we never heard him say Notre Dame per se, but he's kind of got that I want to be with other dudes persona.
It would definitely take some stones to be talking to other guys at the Notre Dame Invasion about going to school. Right.
And look, Dante's got that too. But the difference is one kid's ready to make the decision and the other one's not. It's kind of that simple. And one kid has been allowed by his family to make his decision on his time frame, and the other one has not.
Like, I felt like who was the top tight end recruit that was there? The number 10,
Jack Larson.
Thank you. every time Jack Larson, they were doing, routes on air, and then they were doing some one-on-ones. It felt like, and I could be wrong on this, but I was watching pretty closely. It felt like every time Jack got up, CJ was throwing him the ball. Like there were like 15 quarterbacks, okay? And there were 3 tight ends that were in this group. And every time he was up, CJ was throwing him the ball. Like, I don't think that was an accident. You know what I mean? Like, just saying. I felt like that was an on-purpose situation,
Right. Last few here, Mike Sullivan asks, how has Blake Fisher taken to Harry Hiestand? From every source that I've talked to, Blake loves playing for Coach Hiestand because this is what we said. Blake is a kid that showed up, like going back to when he first showed up last January, Vince. We were shocked at how good a shape he was in. Wow, you usually kids that are like his size and his frame, like they kind of show up fat, and then you got to work that off of them. Blake showed up in the best shape of his life because he's a hungry kid. He wants to be great. And I think he understands. And this was a question: would he get this? This was a very legitimate question we had before Coach Hiestand took over. Was how's Blake going to respond to him? And if Blake wants to be great, then he's going to respond well to him. And everything we've heard so far is Coach Hiestand is very hard on Blake, but it's sort of like, from my understanding is, and again, I don't have this, I wasn't there. I'm just kind of relaying what people said, is that sort of like he is that way because he knows number one, that's just kind of partly who he is, but also he knows that Blake wants to be great. And not every kid wants to be pushed. Some kids are just like, look, just leave me alone. Like, you're always hard on me. Other kids are like, yeah, keep coming, keep at me. Because like Robert Haynes was that kind of kid. You could never, like, you can't compliment Robert Haynes. He doesn't want to hear it. He wants to talk about what do I need to do to get better. Some guys are just like that. And I don't know. I mean, I think Blake likes getting compliments, right? I mean, everyone does. That I was being hyperbolic, but I think Blake understands. Like, look, I want to do better. I want to be better. I want to be better. I want to be the best. I want to be great. And he understands that Coach Hiestand can get him there. And from what I've been told so far, Vince, he's taken to it extremely well.
Which is great to hear. I mean, even from a standpoint, it was like, this guy can get me he can get me to the place where I want to be at the next level. Even if it's that small of a thing, then that's huge, right? I mean, even if it's just that, which I think it's more than that, but even if it's, I'm going to use this guy who has the clear track record to put guys in the top 10 in the NFL draft, even if it's just that, that's fantastic. I think it's more than that, but even if it's just that, that's great.
Right. Agree. Okay, let's get to a couple more here before we get out of here, Vince. John Leahy says, who could push for a starting role with a big jump in the weight room during the summer? That's an interesting one, Vince.
It's a really interesting one because I'm not sure how many.
Let's take it away from weight room and just say off-season program. Weight room, running, all that. Because I feel like weight room has more to do with linemen. There's one guy that keeps popping in my head that if he has a strong summer, which leads to a strong fall camp, could be that guy, and it's Deion Colzie.
Okay.
If the light goes on for Deion Colzie this offseason, he's going to be a hard kid to keep off the field. For a number, he's talented, but also he's the one guy that has the body type that you look for in a boundary receiver in this offense. He's probably the first one, and that kind of jumps into my head as a guy that could have that on offense. My one for defense, Vince, would probably be Ryan Barnes. Be my one for defense. Who would yours be? Guys that you just think with a really good offseason could, like Rocco popped in my head. Like, he was one that popped in my head. What are some ones that are kind of like, what's going, like, what are some of the names that just immediately jump into your head when you have that conversation?
Defensively, I was thinking, because I think when we use the word starting, I think that eliminates some guys. I will say a prominent role, because like for corner, I think you need 4 to be successful. Okay. And so I think Jaden Mickey is on that list for me. And as an early enrollee freshman, I think an offseason in the weight room is huge for him because he's not a huge guy. And so I think not only the weight room, but also film study and all of those different things, becoming a collegiate corner. He's a guy that popped into my head as a true freshman, right? I think that could be big for him. Tobias Merriweather, offensively, I think the offseason could be really big for him since he missed out on spring because he was still in high school. How much advantage is he going to take of June and July and then into fall camp of the weight room, of film study, of all the extra things that you can get done, again, as a true freshman, right? I think those two that probably popped into my mind first. One from offense, one from defense.
Those are good. Very good. Here's one, Vince. Bill Walsh. If Patterson moves to guard and plays well, how big is that for his draft prospects? Look, whenever you can prove that you can be a legitimate standout at multiple positions, and center is viewed as a different position than guard for all intents and purposes. Sure. It's not just like O-line. Not everybody can be good at all 5 O-line positions. It's only going to help your draft stock. I mean, it could hurt it. I think it could hurt it more. If he stayed a center dominated, it doesn't hurt his draft stock. It just doesn't necessarily prove that he can play another position. If he moves to guard and struggles, that could hurt his draft stock. But if he plays well, which we expect Patterson to play well, only helps his draft stock.
Right. I mean, he's potential All-American at center. And so if he can play at a high level at guard, that only improves what he's going to be able to do, no question.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think he'll play well at guard. I have no doubt that he'll play. I actually think he'll be a better guard than he was a center. Because I think his athleticism, without now having to snap the ball, I mean, we're going to see him on pulls and all that. I mean, more. We'll see him move more. He wasn't like pulling a ton. I think we'll see him on counters and Sorry, go ahead, Vince. What were you saying?
No, I think that's a really good point. Because remember, we were talking about him being the starting tackle last year before he got injured. I mean, and so
he didn't get injury. No, he didn't get injured. It was. We were talking about going into the season, him being a tackle, and then Blake Fisher kind of stepped up in the spring and locked it down. And it was like, okay, Blake's got that. Yeah, he got injured this offseason. Yeah. No, it all.
The point of the matter is the fact that we were talking about him as a legitimate starter at left tackle. Okay, tells me, that should tell everybody that he is a really good offensive lineman, and he's probably going to excel at guard.
Because he's not your typical center. He's not a short, sawed-off guy. He's got long arms. He's got, he's 6'4.5". He's athletic. He's got some strength. I think you're going to get to see his strength used even more because he's going to have more solo block. A guard is going to have more opportunities to ISO block. I mean, meaning I'm not ISO as in the ISO run concept, but ISO in that I'm blocking this guy. We're going to see him move on movement blocks more. I think it's going to be good for him. I think it's going to showcase his overall ability more, assuming he's healthy, which I believe he's going to be. Keith Wiegand, real quick, asked, when was the last time Notre Dame played UCLA? They had a home and home in 06 and 07. So the last time they played UCLA was 07.
That's Marja at the last minute, right?
That was 06. Yeah, 06 was the home game where Brady scrambled, hit Samardzija, Tom Hammond, Samardzija, and then quiet, touchdown. That was an awesome one. But then they played him the next year, and that was one of their 3 wins. They beat them on the road the next year at UCLA as well. So I believe that's the last time that they have played. Maddie K says it's going to be the last one. Then we're gonna get Mesa K to get us out of here, Vince. Maddie K says, Maddie K 55, Brian and Vince, we saw Stroud and the Ohio State offense slow down by, in my opinion, the 2 best defenses they played last year. Is there a scenario where we can see this with Notre Dame and we hold Ohio State to say 27 points?
Is there a scenario?
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. Look, we've talked about this many, many times. Notre Dame has a really good defense, right? Sure. And it's kind of a situation where the offense gets the headlines, but the defense does the dirty work, right? I mean, the defense is really good. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to complain about that. The defense is going to have to play really, really well. Right. I mean, especially the secondary, but especially the front. The front's going to have to get in CJ's face, right? I mean, we're not going to break down, everything at this point, but they're going to have to play well. Could they hold Ohio State 27 points? If they do, it's a really good sign. I mean, they're giving Notre Dame's offense.
I think they win. I don't think they'll lose. If they hold Ohio State in the 20s, they're not going to lose. I have a hard time with that.
And that's fair. I wasn't ready to go that far, but I agree with you at this point. I think I have a lot of faith in the Notre Dame offense to score points. The Notre Dame defense is going to have to step up and hold them. They're going to have to because it's a dynamic offense over there.
So the other part of his question, and I wanted to bring it up second because I wanted to just I wanted to hear what you had to say about that. Okay. And you have. And then I wanted to answer his follow-up for Matty K. Follow-up because there really is no excuse why Notre Dame shouldn't hold Ohio State under 30 with the dudes we have. I think to me what that boils down to, Vince, is it depends on if they're scoring over 30 because of your defense. If the defense is the reason they're giving up over 30, that would be disappointing. Right, because you're supposed to be a top 10 to 15 defense. You're supposed to dominate the trenches and all this other kind of stuff, right? Right. And so, but we have to leave open the possibility of it's not always the defense that gives up X amount of points. Like the defense didn't give up 29 points to Toledo.
Right.
It didn't. Like the defense, so you have to think about that too. And it's not the defense didn't give up 24 points to Cincinnati. They gave up like 17, maybe even 14.
Right.
You know, when you consider they had the interception, they got ran back inside the 20, they had the fumble, the kick return fumble that they recovered inside the 10. If those things happen against Ohio State, they're scoring over 30. I mean, it's going to happen. So you have to play clean on offense and special teams also to keep them under 30. So my point is, he's right. There is no excuse for that. I just want to make sure we specify that the defense could play well and still give up 30-plus points because the other parts of the team didn't play well. And Ohio State's the kind of team that they will take full advantage of your mistakes.
100% take advantage of your mistakes.
Yeah.
That's what scares me, to be honest with you, from a scoring point standpoint.
Yeah. So D Troll Hunter asked, did we confirm 4:30 or 5 o'clock there tonight? We're not sure yet. It's going to be either 4:30 or 5, but that's why you got to hit the subscribe button. And if you're not on Twitter, follow me on Twitter too, because we'll tweet it out. But that's why you got to hit the notification bell. And I mean, look, Mace K says it all the time, Vince. I mean, just let's let him do it. So just why don't you go and read this out of here, Vince, and let's get us rocking and rolling here. So I guess Vince can't do that. So I'll read it. Join the message board, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, leave a 5-star review if you are listening via podcast. Visit the IB store for some sweet merch like this shirt, Vince's shirt, the flags, all that stuff is there. Tons of stuff. And as always, go Irish. So for show 1 is now over and complete. We'll be back either around 4:35. Hit that notification bell to find out. I just got to make sure that I am going to have people there and that we're certain on the timing of it. It will be a recruiting show for those that are asking. I think you all can figure out what's going on, and we'll talk about some more later. So for Vince, I'm Brian and the Irish Breakdown crew. Have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you again literally very, very soon.